I show 5:30, so we are ready to get going. I will call the meeting to order. First order of business is roll call. I will start with Director Barrows.
Here.
And Director Decker.
Here.
Director Smith.
Here.
Director Zavala.
Here.
And I am also here. So tonight we are doing one of our monthly board workshops where we're reviewing items for next month's regular business meeting, followed by a superintendent's report. So Kathy, I'm going to turn this over to you for the contracts, policy, and teaching and learning. Thank you.
So first up tonight, we've got Brett Blechschmidt, our Chief Operating Officer. He has 13 items under contracts that he will be sharing with the board tonight.
Thank you, Kathy. So I guess I'll dive right in. We're down to a baker's dozen, but still that's a pretty healthy load. So I'll go through pretty quick, but by all means jump in with questions, and we can always go back if I rush through too quickly. First one on our list is a agreement with Partners in Careers. This particular contract would avail their Youth First programming to our high school juniors and seniors. This is a program that provides internships and mentors in the student's field of interest. So it's our recommendation that we approve the contract with Partners in Career, also known as PIC, in the amount of $148,700 plus Washington sales tax.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
So it said for staffing. So is the staffing something we take care of, or is it something they provide?
They provide as part of the contract. We just pay them one lump sum and they provide all the things that are detailed out there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Brett, my only question is this for all juniors and seniors in the district?
I think all juniors and seniors have access to it through our career and technical education. Now, how they get connected, do they need to have a certain class or a certain programming that feeds them into that? I do not know that offhand, but I know that all students would have access through a series of events to that.
So it's not school specific?
No.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, moving on to the lease agreement with the Foundation for Vancouver Public Schools. Of note here is this would be our first long-term lease offer to them. We have those similar leases with other essential valued partners, as you've read. They had sought more than a one-year agreement so that they can have the stability in their planning. And so again, we're recommending that we offer that stability for them and acknowledge the value of our partnership with the 30-year lease that's before you. Questions on that? All right, another one that's kind of a routine annual renewal of our membership within the Washington Interscholastic Activities Association, WIAA. We have a resolution and the approval to move forward with their membership application before you. Questions on continuing our participation with WIAA? All right. Moving on to newer, more exciting items, in my opinion. We have before you the award of bid number 2021-011 for construction of Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary. I'll just say right off the bat, you'll see in a lot of the different documents, there's still parenthetical or other references to 25th Avenue, and that's because when we put the bid on the street, that was the only name we had for that. So we need to create all those contractual linkages back to where we started this bid process. But certainly henceforth in our non-contractual documents, we will be referring to it as Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary. So as you can see, the bid was $31 million. We're suggesting we exercise a deductive alternative for $292,000. So the net award bid for 2021-011 to Corp Inc. Construction would be for $30,708,000 plus Washington sales tax to build Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary.
Brett, is this contract for the 400 capacity or the full capacity?
This is for the, I believe the 410 was the higher capacity, if I'm not mistaken. There was 4 classrooms that were optioned to deduct. We're not recommending exercising that deductive alternative. So we would build the full higher level of enrollment, which I believe was the 410, but
I think it was 410 and 510, but maybe I'm mistaken.
I don't know.
thought it
I don't
was,
want to put
I
them on
thought
the spot.
410 was the higher end too.
Yeah, I don't want to put them on the spot, but AJ, do you happen to remember, or we can certainly get back to you guys via email?
Well, I just want to make sure it's the bigger of the 2 options.
It's the bigger of the
Yeah,
two.
yep, sorry. I recall, yeah, so we had 410 was the higher number, as I recall.
Okay.
That was the 4 classrooms.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, AJ.
And then Brett, when I was looking at the agenda earlier today, there wasn't an attachment on the
It's
agenda
there.
for this.
It's there now.
It's there now. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and that's a good learning for AJ and I. We understood that you typically haven't received or reviewed those contracts. They're kind of boilerplate architect association contracts. They're like 31 pages, but if you want to review those, we'll certainly attach those originally in the future. I guess we won't have any real big project awards. Maybe the Columbia River 800 wing would be the last one we'll have.
Right. It just said in the part that was there, it said attached,
okay.
you will see. And I'm like, I'm missing something. So I just wanted to double check. So thanks.
Brad, I think you've learned we like more rather than less.
I have to confess, I defer to AJ on those. I haven't read that entire contract. He knows it inside and out though, which is great. All right, any other questions on the RBGE?
Well, I just was curious, are we still on track for?
Well, that is a complicated question that we're probably not prepared to answer today. What I would say is we're monitoring the steel. All of our processes are totally in line for an opening next fall, a year from September. We're watching the steel market very closely. There's a lot of scary looking forecasts in terms of how our superstructures are when our superstructures can be delivered. So it's early for us to have that conversation, but we're watching very closely. It could be a white knuckler, but depending on the steel market.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Any other questions on Ruth Bader Ginsburg Elementary? Okay, then we'll move on to some bleacher work at Higgins Bowl. Purchase agreement number 2021-034 with Norpac Seating. This would provide bleachers in 2 different areas of Higgins Bowl. On the visitor side, it would be a full replacement of the existing bleachers. And it would also provide aluminum bench seating, what is now kind of those concrete blocks that people sit on at Higgins Bowl. This would provide aluminum seating for that, which I think would be a welcome addition, and we're happy to be able to provide it as part of the bond program. So our recommendation is that you would approve contract purchase agreement, number 2021-34 with Norpac Seating for that stadium seating at Higgins Bowl in the amount of $466,087 plus Washington sales tax. Questions on Higgins bleachers? All right, we'll move on to a couple other recommendations on that same site. Purchase agreement number 2021-030 would allow us to install a synthetic track surface for Discovery Middle School, but it would obviously be at that Higgins Bowl site. As you've read, Discovery is the only middle school that we have currently without a track, so that would be great for their PE and track programs. And then we also are recommending that we exercise the option to also replace some surfacing around Boggs Field, which would be kind of that similar rubberized surface. The combined cost of both of those initiatives were we to award this purchase agreement to Bay Non-Sports, would be $259,209 plus Washington sales tax. Right, hearing no questions on that, we'll move on to I think the last one at that site anyway, is our recommendation is to approve purchase agreement 2021-032 for multipurpose athletic fields at Kiggins Bowl. And as you've read, this would provide 2 different turf fields. It would replace the existing turf at Boggs Field, which is due for renewal and was built into the bond plan. But also that track that we just talked about on the previous, we have the opportunity to put turf instead of natural grass in there. And you can see that there's some analysis around use and maintenance costs that made turf a preferable option for that field to maximize the use. And so our recommendation is that we approve purchase agreement 2021-032 with field turf in the amount of $795,147.05 plus Washington sales tax. I think that'll be very popular with our community. More fields that can be used year round are very welcome. So look forward to that. Moving on to purchase agreement 2021-033 with Wildan. This is for a series of HVAC improvements at Geyser and Alki Middle Schools, Chinook and Sacagawea Elementary Schools, and the Jim Parsley Center. You may remember you were asked to approve, and you did at your May board meeting, the investment grade audit, which recommended these improvements. The total cost of this contract with Wildan for the work at those schools and sites would be $3,610,883. I'm sorry, $3,610,883 plus Washington State sales tax. Questions on the HVAC improvements?
What's the general timing on those improvements?
We will endeavor to get all those done over the summer. That's why we have a list of more work to be done, but it just can't be accomplished during that optimal summer window. So you'll be getting more and more of these in the late spring next year, gearing up for the last summer of our kind of bond program. We would have liked to have been able to get more of the work done, especially in light of the you know, the air quality improvements that we get through these upgrades, but there's only so much bandwidth we can get into this particular summer. We next have a recommendation to award bid number 2021-024. These are for improvements at Geyser Middle School. As you've read, this would provide new lockers and lighting in their locker rooms, an upgrade of their FCRC space, and addition of a conference room in their office area. So it's our recommendation that you all award bid number 2021-024 to Columbia Cascade Construction in the amount of $560,500 plus Washington State sales tax. Right, moving on, we're nearing the end here. Well, maybe not quite. Next is our recommendation to award bid number 2021-008 for Hudson's Bay Cafe remodel. This would be a series of minor remodels and updates that will improve the functionality and student engagement of this program at Hudson's Bay. It'd be funded through our career and technical education funding for that type of service and programming. So it's our recommendation that we award bid number 2021-008 to Jackson Contracting LLC in the amount of $132,471 plus Washington State sales tax. Questions on Hudson's Bay Cafe? All right, moving on to our only acceptance of the completed project that we're going to ask you to act on. This is a project that was originally bid as bid number 2018-042 for the construction of Itech preparatory schools. So obviously we've been using that facility for a good number of months, but now we're finally able to, with all the punch list items and all of the systems working well, we're able to recommend that we accept the contract with Robinson Construction in the amount of $32,007,508.46 plus Washington State sales tax. We will continue to hold on to the retainage like we always do for the 45 days. Pending approval from Department of Labor and Industry, Revenue, and Employment Security Department. Questions on approving Itech?
I don't have questions. I just have a quick comment. It might be fun to, during COVID times, to do another video tour of Itech, because I know there's a lot of innovative features, particularly that gym space. I know that now that that's finally done, it might be fun for the community to see the final product.
It's pretty cool building. All right, moving on to the recommendation to award bid number 2021-025 to for secure entrances and FCRCs at Hudson's Bay, Discovery, and Washington Elementary Schools. You can see that Hudson's Bay would be getting upgraded FCRC space. Discovery would be getting secure entrance work to make it consistent with our other schools. And Washington Elementary would get both of those items under this proposal. So our recommendation is that we award bid number 2021-025 to First Cascade Corp. For those improvements at those schools in the amount of $377,237 plus Washington State sales tax. All right, exciting stuff, getting all this work done over the summer. Great schools for kids to come back to next fall. And our last one is moving off of the construction side and into the technology realm with our recommendation to approve purchasing agreement number 2021-029 for high school Chromebooks. You can see it's our recommendation that we buy an additional 250 of these Chromebooks to replace devices that were lost or damaged due to the unusual use and circumstances that we were thrust into this year. So our recommendation is that we award the purchase agreement to Troxel in the amount of $92,875 plus Washington State sales tax.
So Brett, just on the iPads that we recently we lease, but for the Chromebooks, it's better to purchase.
Well, the iPads currently, and I believe it's right up to our most recent iPad lease, Apple is giving us interest-free leasing. So that's kind of a no-brainer there. I'm trying to remember, and I hate to put Christine on the spot, but did we lease the first mass purchase of Chromebooks as well? I think through a third-party financing agency, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we did lease our Chromebooks. These are replacement Chromebooks, so it wouldn't necessarily warrant a lease.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the questions. Anything else before I turn it back over to Kathy? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Tonight we do not have any policy items for the workshop, so Marilee Scarborough, our legal counsel, will not be joining us, but we do have some teaching and learning items. Darcy Frank, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, will be going over a couple items with the board tonight. So Darcy.
Yeah, we have a couple books, and I don't know if there are any questions, but our IMC process includes a very thorough discussion with our team and the teachers and the principal about all the titles that are brought forward. a couple of the subject areas were, a little bit touchy. And so we wanted to just go through and make sure that we had discussed everything and that the teachers were, very aware that they needed to be presenting a variety of perspectives. And we were very sure that they had thought this through and that they had support of their counselors and their teams at school, and that they would be able to work with their 8th graders on a couple of these subject areas. So, any questions or anything specific that I can address?
Darcy, I just have one kind of bigger picture question. So when we say restrict to 8th grade, and I think it only applies to VSAA, we have mixed grade in humanities class. So I just want to make sure from a technical standpoint, the board is approving it appropriately. I mean, if there's exceptions for that humanities class.
Yeah, and it would be no lower than 8th grade. And so generally when we specify the grade level, and there are going to be times when there's going to be mixed grade levels, but it wouldn't be lower than 8th grade.
Okay, so a mixed 6th, 7th, 8th would not read these books.
Correct.
Okay.
This is approved for 8th.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Absolutely.
Do any of the other directors have questions about these books? I've read a couple and they're fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay, we did have one item regarding a travel, and if the board has any questions, I think Jim Gray, our Executive Director for Teaching and Learning for Secondary Schools, may be able to answer that. If there's no questions, we'll continue to move forward. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we do have 2 superintendent reports to our board of directors, and our first one up, we will have Jim Gray, our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning. He will be introducing some of our principals who are here with you tonight to talk about what we learned in school this school year 2021 and what went well and what do we hope to keep from our learned experience. So Jim, it's yours.
You're muted.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I believe we have a PowerPoint that's going to be put up here momentarily. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. We are all well aware that the COVID-19 global pandemic has brought upon all of us unprecedented difficulties and pressures in all facets of our lives. The past 15 months have been incredibly difficult, but through the noise and the turbulence each day, our schools and our teachers have stayed laser focused on the reason we all do this work, the kids. That is our why. Tonight, we have 3 stories of love and success. These stories illustrate that even in the most trying times, we can impact students' lives in a positive manner. The opportunity for us all is to hold on to these lessons and learn from them as we look towards a better future this fall. Our 3 principals tonight are Chris Giannotti from Philida Elementary School, Andy Meyer from Skyview High School, and Jody Videlko from Jason Lee Middle School. Chris, thank you for leading us off tonight.
Thank you for letting me join you. It's really a pleasure to be here and to share a pride point and a story with you. One of the most satisfying aspects of our jobs as principals is working within our system and with our teams to outreach and to think beyond our 4 walls in creating learning opportunities for our kids. And this year created endless opportunities for thinking creatively. We worked with departments within our school district to leverage opportunities for students to access their learning even before we pivoted to the hybrid model. We partnered with transportation to think beyond our school boundaries so that students who attended daycare outside of our school boundaries could come to school. And we partnered with counselors to create transition plans to support kids' needs and worries as they returned. We all have these success stories and pride points related to partnering for kids at our own schools. In January, February, we shifted to hybrid programming. Different schools at the elementary level created models for learning that were responsive to the requests and needs of students, families, and staff. While most of our VPS students chose to return in some capacity, there were many who could only be remote. Some of our schools offered hybrid-only models, while some were also able to provide specific remote-only classrooms. And Philida was one of those buildings that was able to provide both models. We were able to welcome some of those students into our remote-only classrooms, and these students became dual citizens of both their home school and their new school. Isaiah is one of those dual citizens, and his Philida teacher became a huge champion for both his access and learning. Her advocacy promoted additional supports for him. It built bridges with his family and promoted trust. And she established an ongoing communication chain between the Philida and the Eisenhower teams. Not only did this communication allow for celebrations of learning to occur, but it also kept the Ike team in the communication loop in preparation for his return to Eisenhower next year. While we're all committed to thinking about each of our students, this story reminds me that our extends beyond our classroom and school walls to all our students in our greater district community. And this indeed is a huge source of pride. Thank you.
All right. Hard to follow up Chris there. That was a great story. Thanks for sharing. I am honored, again, Andy Meyer, principal at Skyview. I'm honored to be sharing Josue's story tonight. And while this has been an extremely difficult year to spend in remote and hybrid learning, I think one of the positives that we can take away from this year is just the power of being able to provide flexible learning environments for our students. And Josue's story really captures the power of providing flexible alternative learning models for our students, and something that I hope that we can take with us as we go into the future. So 8 years ago, Josue and his family came to the United States from Honduras to pursue a better life. While in the United States, Josue registered and attended Skyview High School, all while learning English and trying to keep a job to support his family. Josue had a strong connection with the students and staff at Skyview. Staff described him as kind, respectful, and hardworking. As you can imagine, difficult to maintain a job, learn a foreign language, and continue to pursue your credits towards graduation. Josue took advantage of our Lease branch campus that is on campus here at Skyview for students to be able to engage in a smaller, more flexible learning environment. And there he thrived. In the spring of 2019, he was on track to graduate from Skyview High School. He was going to be the second person in his family to be able to do so. A great source of pride for him and his family. That May, the May of 2019, he was taken by immigration officials where he was detained for the next 18 months. Many of our staff were very saddened by this and thought that they might not ever see Josue again. Well, this January, Josue was released and came back to Vancouver, and almost immediately contacted Skyview High School to talk about picking up where he left off to earn his high school diploma. We were obviously very elated to help support Josue, and we were able to register him in our Lease branch campus, where just 2 weeks ago, he completed his graduation requirements and pick up on his journey to be an auto mechanic. So Josue will be a member of our graduating class this year. He will be attending Clark College next fall. And this is such an amazing story to me to see the smile on his face when he was in the building a few weeks ago, showing off his accomplishment. It just really highlights the power of creating flexible alternative learning environments in our high school. So a great source of pride for Josue and the Skyview community.
Hello, I'm Jody Videlko, principal at Jason Lee Middle School. And as a building leader, witnessing the magic of a student, a teacher, family, and community advocates coming together as partners in the learning process is truly gratifying. Finding ways to do this virtually in the midst of a pandemic has been very challenging. As you well know, many VPS heroes have risen to the challenge to make this happen with our students. Tonight, I have the pleasure of sharing a student story that highlights the heroic efforts of a Jason Lee student who has blossomed as a learner and as a leader with the help of a teacher, Mrs. Royce, and an incredible support team. It is an example of the importance of maintaining a growth mindset in education, the value of creativity, and the power of student ownership in the learning process. Before the pandemic forced our schools to close last year, a student enrolled at Jason Lee. Impacted by a history of trauma and mental health concerns, the student was not ready to engage in academics or interact with peers. The student instead chose to sit under a desk coloring or playing with toys brought from home. Coming to school and staying in class was a daily struggle, and then the pandemic struck. And for many students, transitioning to remote learning was very difficult. In this particular case, the opportunity to engage safely behind a blank screen was liberating. Remote learning has worked phenomenally well for this student. When Mrs. Royce encouraged her class to share their interests and created opportunities for student voice and choice, this student began to blossom. Over time, our student gained confidence. Armed with courage and tenacity, this child began to see themselves as a learner with the ability to question, to speak their truth, and the strength to tackle challenging work. So today, you will find this student taking a leadership role in Mrs. Royce's class. The student attends regularly, their computer screen is on, and is engaged in the whole class, small group, and individual learning experiences. Most importantly, our student has recognized their personal academic strengths, and we now see a student who has found their voice, advocating for marginalized groups of people, thinking critically, and articulating complex thoughts. This student's journey for personal and academic growth has been truly magical, and it's a testament to what our students are capable of when they are empowered and supported by strong and caring adults. So thank you for allowing me to share this amazing child's story tonight.
Thank you, Chris, Andy, and Jody for sharing these wonderful stories. In these stories, we heard multiple themes of things we want to continue to do as a system. These include continue to find innovative ways to individualize instruction to ensure all students learn at high levels, maintain a growth mindset, think beyond our school walls for ways to teach and support all kids, find even more ways to leverage teams and partnerships to create greater capacity for support for our most vulnerable kids, and never, ever, ever give up on kids. Thank you.
And the second half of our presentation is going to be led off by our new superintendent, Dr. Jeff Snell. So Dr. Snell, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kathy, and thank you, principals, for taking the time to share this evening. We really appreciate the stories, and I know that those represent a lot of other stories that have happened in the schools of people coming together and making the best of some really challenging circumstances. And I know when we were preparing as a team for this opportunity for you as a board to come and discuss what the fall looks like, we appreciated that you recognized as a board that there are some things that we learned that we hope to continue in the fall. And so despite a year that nobody would have wished on anyone or our students or staff or you as board members to try to navigate, there's some positive that's coming from that. And so we wanted to start tonight by just reframing and really focusing on that positive, and then kind of gathering ourselves and thinking about returning to normal. And what does that mean for us? And, you know, we now put those air quotes around normal because nobody knows anymore what normal is. And really think about the practices and what the experience could look like in the fall for our students and staff and families. So I wanted to start first with just some considerations. You all as a board have had to make really challenging decisions over the course of the last 18 months. And certainly decisions that school boards before you haven't had to weigh in on. Number one, just the student and staff safety component as we were trying to discover what this pandemic meant for us all and how to, I guess, appropriately mitigate the concerns that we had. And then on top of that, of course, the normal student learning and social, emotional, mental health responsibility that you have as a board for our 20,000 plus students. And so it weighs heavy. And I think over the course of this year and in my conversations with you individually in my transition, I've heard a commitment to trying to get students in person and to have I guess just recognizing how valuable it is, even though these great stories have amplified that there are opportunities in what we've learned, and that we still want to have that flexibility, that there is magic that happens in the interactions between teachers, staff, and students in the building. And so what I tried to do is in basically reflecting on the decisions you've made this year and my observations from board meetings, my individual conversations with you, and then also try to reflect the values of staff and students and families. These are a set of considerations that I thought, you know, just to kind of start with and anchoring our conversation and really opening up some discussion for you as a board to, you know, to reflect, do these accurately kind of share kind of your decision-making process as a board member. And so I'm not going to read through each one, but I would love to just create some space, maybe talking with you first, Kyle, and just allowing each board member to kind of comment on these considerations and thoughts for these moving forward.
Sure, thank you. I first want to thank all the principals that just presented. Part of, I think, Tracy and I posing that question to Kathy Everidge was, we all had the privilege of going into the schools in the last month. And I think the key theme, and we all touched on this last week, was really some great things did happen this last year. So what are the things moving forward? So I would say that second to last bullet is really a priority for me, is how do we leverage what we learned, both from a flexibility standpoint, but creating different learning opportunities and experiences. Because I know, you know, there was some students that thrived in the more remote situation this past year. So flexibility, learnings from this past year. I really like the last bullet, just engaging stakeholders. There's so many different voices, I think, and experiences from this past year that can probably be part of our creative problem solving. So I would say that's the last thing I just want to touch on. This past year has been so hard, and the administrative team had so many, we've had to start school so many different times. I think at one of the schools I was told they had 14 first days of school. So it was a constant action and reaction. And we pivoted so quickly, so many times, and it was so impressive. But going into this next year thoughtfully and, you know, hoping that we can have one plan. So maybe not as reactive, but thinking through the student experience. So the first bullet, prioritizing student experience. I'm just thinking through, social distancing parameters, for instance, but then being in the schools and seeing kids eating without tables, how do we kind of marry the guidance and the guidelines with improving the student experience? Anyways, I said a lot as always, so I will pass the baton.
Thanks, Kyle. Other board members?
This is Kathy. So I love the fact that we start with the student experience, and given Jeff that you put this together, I'm not surprised because that's kind of how you look. That's your lens that you carry with you to go. And I believe that by prioritizing the student experience, but engaging the stakeholders in planning and through communication, in making sure that that stakeholder piece includes the students, engaging the students and talking about what worked for you, what didn't work for you, what helped, what didn't help. And so as we look forward, a lot of these conversations we're not going to necessarily have at the great big board policy directing level. They're more like within the buildings and between families and teachers too. Like, this is what worked for my kid last year. How can we incorporate that into this year? And so the idea of what worked for Jose this year and what worked for David this year, and then how do we do that? How do we change what's happening, what's usually happened, into what's best for the kids? And while we're currently having the board level conversation, I want us to make sure that we provide room for the buildings and the teachers to discuss. And what I love that one of the things I love that happened is, because we had some schools that had to invite, dual citizenship, as Ms. Gennady said, had to invite students from other buildings into the remote programs. Now we've got cross discussions between the teachers in the buildings, which I think is something that we've needed to do for a long time. And while people will go to PDs, and there'll be some meetings people go to and they get a chance to talk, actually being able to collaborate over a child or a situation, I think provides the best opportunities to grow what we know about what's best for kids. And I hope all of that made sense. But I think we do know that we want the kids all to be in school, but we also want that to be good for all kids, and it's not going to look the same for all kids.
Thank you, Kathy.
And Kyle, I think I rambled more than you did.
I'll jump in. This is Wendy. Although I don't know that I have much more to add, I think Kyle and Kathy were succinct and said it well. I didn't feel like you were rambling at all, Kathy. I would just say that the biggest takeaway for me from this last year, and thank you to all the principals also for sharing their experiences and their stories from this year. My biggest takeaway is, as both a school board director and as a teacher and educator, is the value of flexibility. And I think that thinking of all the different times that we've had to pivot and change our plans, and that sort of flexibility, but also offering the flexibility to our students and our families, and how important that has been this year. I think that honestly, I was dreading fall 2020, but I'm super excited about fall 2021. I'm really optimistic that we're going to be able to return to normal as in many more ways than we were able to do this year. And I think that's the priority of everyone on the board. At least that's what I'm hearing, and I would agree with I don't know that I have anything additional to add. I think this list is perfect. It encapsulates all the things that I've been thinking about too. So thank you, Jeff, for starting the conversation as well.
Thank you, Wendy.
Well, I can share some of my thoughts. I agree with Wendy. I think this list is pretty comprehensive and kind of encapsulates a lot of, I think, the things that we need to consider and the priorities. I think those first two bullets, the priority of the student experience and the importance of in-person learning, in my mind at least, kind of are the overarching priorities in my mind. And I think a lot of the other things, you know, kind of fall into place. How can we put, you know, the importance on in-person learning while also, you know, minimizing the risks for students and staff, and also being flexible and, you know, building those, you know, plans for what happens if things change. You know, if our priority is the student experience and in-person learning, you know, how can we then engage our stakeholders in planning for that? And so I feel like those in my mind are kind of the, you know, kind of priorities or the overarching considerations in my mind as we move forward with looking at what does fall look like.
Thanks, Tracy. Sandra?
Ditto. No, I mean, honestly, I think what everyone said is really what I was also going to say. I think the list is good. I think we've all learned to be very flexible. And I think we've also learned how resilient our students are. And just, I think it's true, you know, I think the priority is our students and how we can best accommodate to them and, you know, to the students with the most need. So I think, and I think the last bullet point for me is like the most important as well, is engaging our stakeholders from like keeping our community also part of the conversation.
Thank you all. I'm going to slide then from these considerations, but I think this is a slide that we may come back to almost every single meeting, just as an anchor to kind of think about like how we're managing decisions. The hope is that we aren't having to figure out shifts from hybrid to remote to full in person and all that, right? That we can really focus on the experience that they're having in school and the flexibility that we're providing through other programming. But we also, I think 15, 16 months into this, recognize that our hopes sometimes don't align with what actually happens. And so having this as an anchor, I think, will be important. So when Kathy gave me the opportunity to kind of start engaging a little more, we talked about this last transition that you as a board approved May 3rd and May 10th with bringing more students in at grade levels, and then usually using kind of the need assessment to bring in more students. We recognize that that was probably the last major transition of the school year, just given the timing of the year. And so we wanted to intentionally kind of get through that and then catch our breath and then think about the fall. And so we've been planning this opportunity, and the first round of stakeholders that we engaged was some representative principal leaders, and then the Vancouver Education Association as well, just to kind of talk through what we knew at the time. And of course, just like everything else we've planned this year, we had this set up for Friday morning at 8 o'clock with the principals, and then the state released updated guidance for the fall Thursday afternoon. And I mean, I don't know how many times that's happened this year where we try to, okay, this is the decision point we're going to have to do, and then something changes. And so one of the things that I was really wanting to seek clarification from you as a board was the planning for 5 days a week next year. You had all told me individually that you wanted to see that as an option for our families. But we needed to publicly kind of say that and collectively, and me not make assumptions individually that that's the will of the board. And so the state kind of took care of that for us with their announcement on Thursday, because they said that's the plan for everybody. And so 5 days per week in-person learning. They also have given districts the option of providing a remote learning setting for families. And just in the conversations with staff here, listening to the community through public comment previously, and just the feedback that we've received, it seems very appropriate for us as a school district to continue to offer remote learning. We're fortunate that we have some programs that can do that. But we also learned from tonight's examples that we've been creative in doing that this year as well through our existing schools. And so we'll talk a little more about that. The state has also said that they want some mitigation measures to stay in effect. And that they've also talked about physical distancing, but they've definitely given more flexibility around the physical distancing than they did previously. And so the language is that we default with the 5 days in person. That's our starting point. And then we try to work the physical distancing. As before, it was more we started with physical distancing and tried to increase capacity. And I think that's a product of recognizing that our schools are doing a great job, not just in Vancouver, but across the country, and really taking these mitigation measures seriously. And we're not seeing the transmission rates in schools that the general community is experiencing. It's not to say that we're not dealing with cases, as you know, that we are having cases, and our teams at the school level are doing an amazing job of communicating that. And it's a very difficult conversation to tell a family that their student is excluded because of a quarantine as a close contact. And so I don't want to minimize that this has just been, all the staff rolled it out, all the kids are here, and it's just fine. That this is an ongoing struggle, and one that we're going to continue to look for guidance around. And I'm pretty sure that it's going to continue to get updated over the summer. But this is a starting point for us. I provided on the right side of the slide the citations from the new requirements, and so just pulled out some of those key points that you saw in the bullets on the side. It is interesting when you look at the mandatory mitigation measures, there are a couple that are missing here, and that's intentional, and it is the screening process and the attestation process. So those are things that now are a local decision, not necessarily, they aren't mandated by the state. And basically in the conversations, it was that the return on investment and where we're at with the virus and vaccinations, those aren't necessary anymore from the Department of Health's point of view. So those are, there's just new guidance, like new layers of this that create opportunities locally, which can be either viewed as an opportunity or as a challenge, depending on how you're looking at that. So what we did with the principal group, and also sharing with leadership from our teachers union, is just started to look at some of these big topics. So the first one is related to learning delivery model. And for tonight, I thought what we would do is, these big, large general topics are important, and really just, I'm going to prompt you with some of the feedback that we got, and then just allow you to comment on that and ask questions and potentially give us some direction on this. So with the learning delivery model, these are the words that came out from the feedback that was given from principals. You notice something kind of big in front here, landing page canvas. Those were something that was viewed as a positive, that for the first time in our system as a necessity, we really had a way for parents to engage, in theory, through one platform. And before, parents have had to, especially if they had kids at multiple levels, or navigating lots of different platforms had been a challenge. And so that was something that this group of stakeholders anyway saw as a positive, and that potentially moving forward, if we do have to pivot again, having that as a foundation would be important. And so we wouldn't have to be recreating something like we did last March to try to figure out how to make it through the end of the year. There is also a lot of discussion about flexibility and, how do we meet students and families where they're at, and helping them understand what the 5-day model could look like. And I think for the most part, based on the new guidance, it could be relatively normal, I guess. except that masking is still required as of today. Those kinds of things, structures and our distancing in certain areas, of course, is going to look different than it does in the classroom. The other big piece here is when we look at our population and roughly anywhere from 20 to 40% of our students, depending on what grade level they're at, are selecting remote learning. And so one of the action steps as a result of this workshop will be to start the process of surveying families for the fall. And it's a hard thing because like families, as a parent, you probably the first question you'd come, well, what's it going to look like? Right. And part of it is like, well, we kind of have to know how many people want certain models to know what it looks like, right? And what kinds of so it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. But for the most part, I think we can say that the 5-day-a-week in-person model is going to have the same kinds of options that kids had before from a class standpoint, extracurriculars, opportunities like that. The remote learning side is a little different because as we heard tonight, we had staff at the schools providing some pretty extraordinary flexible situations to try to make it work. And when I talked with some of our staff around that, it's great. They were happy to do that, but they also felt like sometimes that they couldn't do an excellent job in any of those areas because they're spread pretty thin in trying to make that happen. And so one of the question points that I think would be interesting, in addition to anything else that you want to talk about with the learning delivery model, is what does remote learning look like? We're fortunate in Vancouver that we do have a virtual program in place. But we may have families that are choosing to do remote learning, not because they think that's necessarily the best option for their student, but because there are some extraordinary circumstances still coming out of the pandemic. And so they may be a Hazeldale Elementary kid and they want to be a Hazeldale Elementary kid for the future, but for next year, they're still a little worried about that. And so what do we do with that? Do we continue to try to think about some middle ground and provide opportunities for students? Is that a direction that the board would like us to consider? Or do we make people choose as we go forward? Because it has been pretty challenging to try to figure out how to meet each unique student and family's needs. So I'll pause here on the learning delivery model. And also just as a protocol to some of the principals who are on the call tonight, we're also in the feedback session. So if there's ever anything I miss, feel free to unmute and interject. But we'll turn it over to the board members now to just discuss learning delivery model, some of the things that you would like us to consider moving forward, some opportunities for growth, and maybe some direction about the remote learning.
I'll jump in. So I'm actually really happy to see the Canvas landing page bold. I know it's funny to come full circle from last spring. Parents felt a lot of frustration. Kids felt a lot of frustration. I've heard such wonderful feedback that students can navigate. They're so much more self-sufficient, and there's a single source of information. So I do think and for parents to be able to access and follow along. I also think about the continuity of the experience. So if a student did have to go in quarantine, for instance, having that online access point to know what's going on in school. I'm very happy to hear that we want to continue offering a full remote option. I think there's many families in our community that's still the right fit. But I like your last question, Dr. Snell, about how to keep the students feeling part of their school community. Because that is an important part of the school experience. And I will say I've witnessed a lot of things, the morning news being shared via YouTube. And so is that something that a VLA student could get a channel of their own school's news, for instance? It's, helping those students that are in the remote model stay connected. I do hope that that's a priority for our offerings next year, because I think especially if it's a temporary transition as they stay out. They're going to want to come back and rejoin their 4th grade class and feel connected. So I know that our staff has done such an amazing job of being able to Zoom so many things from assemblies and morning news and awards recognitions, that if we can do that and somehow still provide access to the students that aren't able to participate in person.
Thank you, Kyle. Other thoughts?
This is Kathy. Something about this page, and I don't know exactly what it is, just makes me think about, so having worked at Ogden, where a lot of the families don't have alternative transportation. So if their kiddos, like I would have kindergartners that occasionally would miss the bus, and there was no way for them to get to school. And so they would miss a day of school. And so for whatever reason, looking at this page makes me think, wouldn't we now have a great opportunity for, if they miss the bus, they wouldn't have to miss a full day of school. They could access the Canvas page and they could do the things that the classes do. Did you guys get any of that, or did you lose me?
I think we got most of it, Kathy. You cut out right when you said if they could access the class and do the things that they would normally do.
Yeah, so for whatever reason, my connectivity is very unstable. Although everybody in my house is telling me they're not using any of it, but I don't believe them. But anyway, but that's what popped out at me, and I was trying to figure out why did that come to my head, but maybe it's the landing page in the Canvas, but just the opportunity, increasing the opportunity for kids to be learning, whether it's remote or in person, I think is really key. That's it. Believe it or not.
Thank you, Kathy.
I guess I would want to know a little bit more about, when we talk about remote options, kind of what some of those options are, or some of what we're talking about, because I know we have Virtual Learning Academy, but when we're talking about remote, like in Kathy's example just now, when she said a student misses the bus and they can access their class remotely, I guess I would want to know a little bit more. Are we talking then about the responsibility of the classroom teacher to now be live streaming for one student? Are we also talking about, like, I know, right now, for example, some schools have, like I'll say, like in the 3rd grade, there's 3 teachers that are teaching in person and 1 teacher that is full remote. So I guess I would want to dig in a little bit more to know kind of what those remote options are. Because like for those examples, a student at VLA, a student who's at Hazeldale, for example, with a fully remote teacher versus a student who, students maybe who are remotely accessing their classroom and a teacher is simultaneously live streaming and teaching a person. Those are 3 very different models and a lot of different parameters. And, some of those kind of give me some pause in terms of, I don't know, just maybe not, I don't know. I have some hesitation around some of those options, or some of what that might look like, because I know for our teachers that simultaneous access is tricky, and I don't see that necessarily as a long-term option. And I am kind of curious about the short-term options and kind of the spontaneity of, oh, a kid is absent.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just that kind of makes me a little hesitant to begin going down that path of.
Yeah, Tracy, I think you're keying in on a really important aspect. There's several decision points here. One decision point is around what options do we provide for students next year who are choosing in-person versus remote learning. And then the next layer, which is Kathy's bringing up, I think, is this opportunity that we have in the future, which is a lot more discussion and figuring out like, how does remote learning affect the in-person learning person's experience, right? Like, and there's some huge opportunities with that. And then you can imagine, like, if you're teaching US history and Friday morning, like half the class just doesn't feel like coming in, but they want to Zoom in. Like, that's a whole different model, right? And there's a loss of what happens in the classroom if that's just an option, because I'm guessing my 17-year-old self probably didn't really want to get up early on Friday and show up. And so there's some layers to this. And so for today, like, certainly Kathy is a great idea and we should be exploring that. But for today, I'm really curious about the board's perspective about this remote learning option. So if you think about a student that's choosing this, a family that's choosing this, or feeling like that's what they have to, that it's not a choice, they just have to do it. Should we just have that go through a VLA? Or should we start to think about maybe having some other types of options? And, you know, if we have 2,000 students that want that, let's say at the K-5 level, do we want 2,000 VLA students, or do we want, and I don't know what that looks like. And obviously that requires people selecting that, but I'm curious if, you know, from a board's member perspective, where would you lean on that? Like having them go to VLA, or maybe thinking about other options too?
Can I speak? I guess the way I also see it is kind of when kind of examples like the VSAA students who their home school is like Discovery, at least this is from what I remember, that they would still have the option of going to sports at Discovery or at their home-based school, right? And I think, in my perspective, I guess, I think it makes more sense to maybe expand the VLA and maybe also have the option of having like the dual language through VLA, because I think we shouldn't have to. I think if we have something, why are we going to reinvent the wheel? And also, we not only are we putting on another job for the principal to be making sure to checking in on the teacher who's you know, remote. So I think if we have something that's just focused on VLA, where the students can go and maybe expand it to where we are giving more options to our VLA students, that could also, they still can go to their home school and be part of the track, be part of the things that the school is offering, but also they're having the option of staying home. At least that's my perspective on it, and also in a sense of taking care of also our teachers who also maybe want to stay remote, and offering that to our teachers, and also our principals, that I can't imagine how they've been able to handle all this, you know, not only taking care of their staff in person and also staff out of school. But I guess that's just, I think we're kind of already there in a sense. I think as a district, you know, with VSAA giving the students the option of doing the art school, but at the same time, still able to do sports at their home base and still being able to be part of their community. I would say it's be similar to that, because I think it is very important for our kids to still be at their home base.
Thank you, Sandra.
And I just want to clarify, I was in no way implying that we would allow kids to just sleep in and roll over and do their I was thinking from the Ogden perspective, where we have chronic absenteeism among early child, you know, kindergarten through second grade, which can be an issue. And the reason why they're absent is because they don't have transportation. But and yes, that's a later discussion. But as I said, it was something that for whatever reason jumped out at me when I looked at this page. And I would say I love the idea of possibly expanding VLA in the way that Sandra was saying, but making sure that it really encompasses all the aspects of what they would get if they were at a homeschool, or, you know, we somehow incorporate them in their homeschool. But I know that there were some issues this year because VLA had never been leaned on in this way before, that kids weren't getting arts blocks. You know, they were at VLA, but they weren't getting arts block time. And so we just need to make sure that if we're gonna expand it or lean on it in a more dramatic way, then we need to also make sure that the other things aren't also falling through the cracks. So nobody's sleeping in and then going to American history.
Well, I just want to jump in on what Kathy was saying, though. I mean, I do look at the students that are, for whatever reason, due to exposure, are required to stay home for 2 weeks in quarantine. I do think that that's a nuance that we do have to consider, how we continue delivering their education during those quarantine. And I would never suggest full live stream, that the teachers have to just kind of pick up and be able to accommodate that. But I do wonder if we leverage some of the technology that we've adapted to this year to accommodate some of these longer term absences that are direct relation to COVID. I think that's something to explore.
I'm going to jump in there. I think that honestly, one of the advantages that I have experienced, I know Kathy was kind of maybe not joking about it, but I have had students who weren't feeling well and were able to log in and experience, you know, class and participate and join in from their bed and whatever. Like, I'll take whatever I can get, right? Especially this year of all years. But I don't know that that's necessarily, I agree with Jeff, that that's not necessarily something you just want to offer, you know, like make a blanket offer, because I think that there would be days in a more normal type of school year where I would have, you know, half my kids in the classroom, and then we can't maybe do the activity that I had planned. I think that I agree, Kyle, that one of the things that I keep thinking of are the students who aren't going to be able to go back to school in person for whatever reasons, and be mindful of the fact that, you know, the expectation or prediction at this point is that maybe sometime in September we'll be able to get our younger learners vaccinated, or even offer that to our younger students. So keeping that in mind, there are going to be a number of families who don't feel comfortable sending them back, and we need to give them a very a robust option in terms of quality of education. Just having a student log in and live stream and watch what's happening in the classroom is not necessarily, I think, the optimal option. I would agree. I think VLA is probably our best option in terms of accommodating those families. I agree that it's really important. For a lot of families, it's still going to be a temporary thing, right? It might just even be until they can get their child vaccinated, and now they want them to go back to their home school. So again, going back to that idea of flexibility, and I agree with whatever we can do, whatever we can come up with to try to build and maintain that connection between that child and the school that ultimately they want to go back to, right, is super important. I think that VLA, though, is probably our best option in terms of providing that, with the caveat that, you know, if there are just so many students who need that option that it becomes untenable, then obviously we may have to get a little bit more creative. But that's the good part of this year, right? We know we can be creative. We know we can find those solutions. So, but I would agree.
Okay.
VLA is probably the best option there.
Well, I also wonder, Wendy, when you say, you know, there might be a, you know, bigger need there, you know, as I think it was Sandra had pointed out, there might be some teachers that for one reason or another still need a remote option. I mean, looking at, you know, perhaps they are, you know, temporarily are teaching out of VLA instead of, I just think the remote options at each of the schools is going to be too, I don't know that it's going to be equitable in terms of, you know, the kids are evenly spread out amongst the classes. I mean, right now kids are attending different schools. So then it's like if they're attending one school and they're remote learning teachers somewhere else, that connection between their school still is not there. I mean, I agree with what you guys are saying about, we have this program, not every district has a virtual learning academy already set up. pre-COVID. So I think leaning on that is going to be kind of our best direction for the long-term solution.
So I want to just add to what they just said. I think one consideration I'd love to see continue to be explored is our specialty programs, especially at the K-5 level, like dual language. We have Mandarin, Spanish, any of the other self-contained classroom programs, just making sure that if we're pooling all of our remote options to VLA, that we are expanding our staffing. I mean, and there might be a good a natural flow of staff that need accommodation in the fall. But I think what a priority for the board last year was we didn't want families to have to choose between a program they were participating in and the safety of their family. So, it might not be, dual language, it wouldn't necessarily be a Harney teacher, but if there could be a second, third split at VLA that can accommodate all of the dual language Spanish speaking students, for instance. I don't know, just wanting to make sure that the remote option accommodates all of the programs, so families aren't necessarily having to sacrifice something, so they can't necessarily re-enter, let's say, the following year.
Mhm.
Or if not necessarily, I mean, obviously VLA is what we're talking about, but if for whatever reason that would prove to be tricky, at least that we discuss, so what do we do remotely for these programs, right? There may not be enough kids in the Hvac program, for example, that are going to be remote, but we still need to provide Hvac accommodations. And so what do we do? How do we do that remotely? And same for our dual language, and same for, is there anything else I'm missing? I guess it's our dual language and our Mandarin program. And if there's something else that's missing, I apologize. But it all depends on how many people, and then where can we how can we accommodate that?
And I would just like to say that also that I think a big part too is making sure that we're building the connections in the community. Because I know that a lot of the teachers have felt, at least those that are remote, have felt a little like lost and like left out from their own community. And so I think if we offer that like BLA and having those focused teachers, I think within themselves, they have their own community. And that they're building that within themselves. Because I think that's also the hardest part about all of this too, is staying connected. And it's so hard to have such a dual, like remote and in person, and making sure that everyone's feeling like they're being part of that community.
And just recognizing what I'm hearing from you all is that once we determine who's selecting the remote option, to really look at those needs and try to use VLA as a default, but then also potentially look at creating some different kinds of add-ons or supports for VLA that would allow a student to still have that homeschool experience, still maybe participate in a program, especially if it's a short-term temporary kind of situation. As you know, the staffing model is pretty intricate. And so we want to provide as much flexibility for staff, but there are some boundaries that we would need to put so that we're not moving people back and forth all the time, and trying to make sure that we have staff set up to be successful as well. And then in addition, students that are EL services, 504 services, special education services, we have an obligation to provide those through the models that are going to work for them. Now, also, we aren't required to provide remote learning. So it's like, I'm hearing you want to do that. I think it's the right thing to do. But recognizing too that by providing that is one layer, I guess, of an accommodation that you as a board would be, directing us to do that you're not obligated to. So it's also, and I know you know this, that as we talk through it about the ideas is then translating those into actualities, I guess, can get a little challenging. And so we'll just need to work through that. But I think you're giving us some direction here to use VLA and then to innovate from there. The hard part when we survey families is they're going to have a lot of questions, and it will be a little bit of, we're going to build it as you guys select it. But these are the kinds of things that we've heard. So, okay. I'm going to keep this moving. This is the biggest topic, just so you know. So just as you're looking at your the time commitment for this evening or whatever, learning delivery model is kind of like you guys talked about the first couple bullets on the decision making kind of capture everything else. The learning delivery model really starts to encompass a lot of this work. The next one is about masking. Now, the state is really clear right now that masking is still a part of the plan moving forward. There's been some confusion in the public about the CDC guidance and the DOH guidance, and now the CDC has really tried to be a little more clear about its vaccinated people in a lot of the opening up, I guess, that's happened. And then we all know, just from a practical standpoint, trying to figure out who's vaccinated and not vaccinated at the track meet or wherever places a lot of burden on school personnel in a really kind of hot potato item that, some people are pretty strongly against mask wearing and other people are very supportive of that. But the bottom line is that right now our guidance is that we wear masks. There may be some more flexibility in outdoor spaces that we see unfold over the next, several months as we lead up to the fall. That's a fairly easy area for us to pivot in the grand scheme of things. Like creating spaces outside for our elementary recesses that might be mask free, but are, trying to maintain the distancing, because there are some in the CDC guidance that talks about staying distanced. In general, though, I think one of the points that you talked about decision-making was following public health guidance. That's been a consistent approach to the decision-making. And I have not heard from you individually nor collectively that you want to go against public health guidance. So this one may be a short conversation, but I wanted to have it here because it is a hot button right now across lots of different sectors. So I'll pause again and allow board members to comment if you would like.
I'm just going to say I would like to see us continue to require that masks are worn. I just think that it is the one element that has consistently been said, this helps spread this virus. And short of us anything that we could do that might say who's vaccinated, who's not vaccinating, not vaccinated, would just be cumbersome. And it would also make, if we're trying to decide which kids should be wearing masks and not wearing, it's all just too much. I think the consistency of the requirement, not having to decide who and what and where and when, everybody wears masks when they're inside. And if there are any other CDC or Department of Health guidelines, we stick to them, is how I feel.
My experience in the schools, kids were not struggling with masks. I feel like a big part of this mask conversation is adults a bit. So I'm very proud that as a board and as a district, we've stuck to science and we have followed public health guidance all along. So if our local public health officials, our state officials, and the CDC give different direction in August or October, I'm absolutely open to it. But I feel very proud and pretty determined that we will continue following the mask guidance, because that is coming from our local guidance, local public health officials.
I agree. I think adhering to the guidelines, and the guidelines right now say masks. I think that's a priority for me, and I think for us is sticking to that guidance. Maybe it will change, and then we will, update and figure out what to do moving forward. I think, though, kind of going back to that priority of the in-person learning experience, if we keep that in mind, if our priority is allowing students and keeping students then 5 days, I think some of these other strategies such as mask wearing I think helps us stay there versus coming back 5 days and then having to pivot into something else. I think if we keep that as our priority, if we have to wear masks, if we have to social distance as much as possible, I think all of those other things kind of fall into that priority as 5 days. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on this one?
I'll just reiterate what we've already heard. My priority has always been following public health guidelines, and that's what we've been doing. I've never been able to wrap my head around why wearing a mask has become a political hot button, but it seems like a simple thing to do. I agree with Kyle. I've not had any trouble with my own students in my classroom. I didn't see any challenges when I was visiting schools. Kids seemed very comfortable with it. I mean, it's just such a simple thing, and if it helps us keep the spread down in our schools, and like Tracy said, helps us maintain that 5 days a week, I mean, that's the priority. And it's just such a simple thing. I don't know why people get upset about it, but I would continue to follow public health guidelines but I would also agree with Kathy. I think it's got to be an all or nothing thing, right? Either everybody wears them or nobody's required to, because there's just no way of keeping track of who's vaccinated, who's not vaccinated, who's yeah, it's all or nothing according to what our public health officials are offering in terms of their guidance.
I also agree with what everyone says. And I guess also say that it also limits germs from colds and flu. So I don't know about you guys, I haven't gotten a cold. So I think that also, I don't know, I've in some sense, I also hope that in the future, we're all more conscientious, and when we are feeling not so good, that we wear a mask. I think it's helped a lot of us not be as sick.
I can speak for some preschool teachers I know who intend to wear masks during the cold and flu season, even once post-pandemic, because there's just, nobody's been sick all year, and it's because of the mask. So I agree, Sandra.
Thank you for the direction on that one. The next one is contact tracing, and this is one that I think we're going to have to stay tuned to, because what happened is the distancing guidance has been relaxed, but the contact tracing guidance has stayed the same. And so what's happened is we have students that are within 6 feet of each other because that's what's allowed. And for the most part, our data is showing that they're not getting sick. We're not having transmissions, but we are having to quarantine them. And so our quarantine numbers are going up, and not just in Vancouver, but in all districts, because we're following these protocols. And it's really challenging, and it's really interrupting the teaching and learning environment, because you're having multiple students out of your class, and those kids are missing out or zooming in, or it's very chaotic. And so the goal, I think the feedback that we had from staff is really, thinking if kids aren't getting sick within 6 feet, why would we continue to exclude them? And so looking at the data, As a region, we are doing a 3-week sample. And so we're asking all districts to turn in the number of close contacts that they've identified by level, elementary and secondary, and then how many of those close contacts actually resulted in a confirmed case. And then giving that to Dr. Melnick and Dr. Krager at Clark County Public Health, and having them help advocate for us if it, it's all about risk mitigation in this. And, if you're excluding, let's say 500 kids across the region for 10 days, that's 5,000 school days that we've lost collectively. So we're going to really kind of push on that. There was a huge acknowledgement in this for the team. So you'll see Lindsay's name on here, Nicole's name on here, because when people were weighing in on this, they were like, we are so grateful for the staff that have been taking this on. And as a district, we may need to think about continuing to staff this and support, because we do want our teachers and our principals to be focused on teaching and learning. And they have to focus on contact tracing as well this year, but next year, like, we have a process in place. And so really trying to think about how we might be a little more efficient with that. Unfortunately, a lot of parents have been told that their kids are close contacts, and so they went through it once. And so one, we want to monitor the guidance and continue to advocate for, let's follow the data on this. And then two, thinking about, like, if it, whatever process it is next year, how do we support our buildings and give them teams that they're really good at this and good communicators, and they can engage the larger community if contact tracing continues to be as challenging as it is this spring. Any questions or comments on that one?
I just have one, I guess, question I would pose, which is, everything you said makes sense. I'm eager to hear what the data results after this 3-week period. I do think there could be value. I mean, we have gotten feedback from the community that families do want to know if there has been close contact. So even if it's not exclusion, that we might maintain notification, like that the communication continues, but maybe the exclusion doesn't. And I'm not suggesting that, I'm just suggesting a consideration of that.
Well, I think that what we've experienced is, well, and I've experienced it as an administrator, planning and then getting the phone call that my son is a close contact. And so it's different levels, right? Like, as a parent, I want to know everything I can to monitor my own child and make sure that everything's okay. As an administrator, I want to try to make sure all those people have the communication they need and keep kids in school if I can. And so there's a lot of priorities here, and we've learned a lot this spring. So I appreciate that comment, Kyle. And as we come up with a plan, really getting an opportunity for some of our stakeholders to weigh in on that. It would be nice if they set the guidance like maybe July 15th, and we had some time to have a plan and then ask people to weigh in on, because I know you all commented on how important it is to have communication, stakeholder input. The thing that's been challenging about that is that we'll do it and then the guidance changes. And so it feels like sometimes from the stakeholder perspective, I'm sure, like, well, did you even ask my feedback? Because by the time I got it to you, it was a whole different set of scenarios. So we'll be mindful of that, though, as we move forward with contact tracing.
That came about mostly from families that have reached out, because if there's risk of the student having had exposure or exposure in the classroom, like, the parents can't jeopardize work days. So they would rather exclude their student, and so they don't have to have missed work days. That's the context with which I most often heard it.
Thank you. Distancing. So this one too, I was going into the feedback Friday and I was like, okay, like, here's the guidance that we have. And then the Department of Health really kind of prioritized the 5-day week with the distancing, and change the language to really give flexibility, as we talked about at the beginning, that it's more about you're getting 5 days in, and then once you have your number of students, then look at the building and try to figure out the spaces to give you the most distancing between. So it's a little different problem and equation. When I talked with Carrie from VEA, also teachers are just trying to think about what does that mean for their instruction, because there are some places that they've wanted to, like for example, as you go and visit classrooms at an elementary, you often see the carpet, right? And students come to the carpet and they engage, or there's the small group table on the side. And I think our staff are interested in understanding what the parameters are going to be for them. They, of course, don't want to jeopardize staff and student safety either, but they also recognize that there's some instructional techniques that they would like to, utilize if possible. So as we move forward with this, with the planning, this will be important to really listen to staff and principals about what is the specific plan. And then, as you know, each of our buildings are a little unique depending on when they were built and the nuances of those facilities. And so it is probably more of a local school kind of coming up with a plan. How do we make this work next year? Knowing what our numbers of students are who are choosing in person is also a variable at play with this. Okay.
This is where the first bullet on the first slide of prioritizing student experience. We've done so much amazing problem solving. I would like to see maybe more consideration of different options for lunch. Walking into a middle school cafeteria with kids all facing one direction, 4 feet apart without a table, that does not seem to prioritize student experience. I recognize that that's mask-free time, but is there some sort of kind of hybrid situation of less kids per table, something? Yeah.
And we have a baseline of experiences this spring. So it was really important to have the opportunity for our middle schools. I was at Jason Lee today with Jody and just seeing the kids and talking about the capacity and that we've kind of stretched a little bit over the last couple of weeks. The reality is if we have grades 6, 7, and 8, we can't space out the same way and continue to give, like at Jason Lee, they're using their gyms for lunch as well. Well, PE is important, and having those experiences. And in May, it's pretty good to be outside playing soccer or whatever. In January, we might need to be using our gyms a little more. So I think just hearing that you want us to explore options and to think about this is important for our teams. And then our teams can think uniquely about their buildings to kind of try to prioritize student experience and try to do our best with physical distancing. Okay. So some other topics that I know are important that could change the game a little bit in terms of the parameters and what's happening. I think Wendy maybe brought up the vaccinations, or one of you did, about younger grades and when they're available. And so that could change some of this guidance. And hopefully, it for sure changes the contact tracing based on the guidance as written, because if you're vaccinated, you do not have to be excluded if you don't have symptoms. So there's some positives around that. We've recognized, I think, as a region and maybe as a country, that the demand for vaccinations now has slowed. And now we're at a point where we really need to do education with families that may be skeptical or have concerns. And so that's something too that I know our partnerships with our labor partners has been important to just try to educate and get our staff vaccinated, but we may have an opportunity to just provide factual information to our families and provide access if they want an opportunity to be vaccinated. And I know the partnership with Clark County Public Health, Brett took them on a tour of Hudson's Bay early on as a potential vaccination site for adults. So there could be more of that comes our way, opportunities that we'll bring for your consideration. And another piece is the COVID testing. And so there's a program at the state that about 100 districts are a part of now called Return or Learn to Return or Return to Learn, which is kind of an unfortunate name because, I mean, learning and returning, like it doesn't really tell you that it's about COVID testing. And so it's screening testing and diagnostic testing, and it's having it available on site. And so as students are potentially quarantined and sent home, they could take a test at the site and not have another layer of families having to navigate. And you imagine how stressful that is, right? Like my student's quarantined and now I need to get an appointment. And now, so there's some opportunities there. And potentially that's more of a diagnostic approach, right? There's a symptom or there's a close contact. And so now we're testing. There's also opportunities for screening potentially. So right now, some districts are doing that with staff. There is the potential for maybe considering that at the student level, like maybe in particular at a high school level where it's a voluntary screening and you're kind of giving you a way to kind of see what's going on with the virus in the community. As we all know, the asymptomatic cases have been really problematic in spreading this virus. And so it's a way of kind of balancing that out. And so those are some topics that we'll just stay continued paying attention to and then briefing you if there's an opportunity to bring that forward. I'm curious about the screening and diagnostic, just based on what I shared with you, and happy to answer any questions. Is that something that you would want the district to get more information about? The only district in Clark County that's doing that now is Camas on a pilot basis, and they've been doing it since March. And so, but Superintendent Rakedahl and Governor Inslee have referenced this as a program and one of the layers of kind of mitigation strategies.
Jeff, I'm intrigued by the idea of COVID testing. Can you kind of just elaborate a little bit what Camas has been doing specifically?
Yeah, so we started with, and I'm going to use we and they, sorry about that, but I am still Camas' superintendent, so I think it's okay. We started with staff screening. And so what that was is like on every Wednesday, staff could come and get a free COVID test. The partners that use this will contact the insurance if the person wants to provide that, and they'll bill insurance, but that's not a requirement. If people don't want to do that, they can still get the test. Then we expanded to diagnostic. And so what that's looking like is our nursing staff, health room assistants are able to give the test. It's actually a self-administered test to anybody that's, I think, above the age of 4. And then we partner with the organization where the tests are sent out to UPS, and then the results are returned to the person who did the test, and then to the nurse who's in charge of it to manage the HIPAA compliance, all that. The cost right now is staffing time. There's no testing cost or anything like that. That's covered through the partnership. I'm not sure what that looks like if all 295 districts do it. Like what's the, is there the bandwidth to cover that cost? I do know that as part of the federal relief, they've talked about testing and funds available for that. We have not expanded the screening to students. It was too much to manage at this point, but that was a possibility that they shared. So. And happy to answer any follow-up questions on that, Wendy, just from a kind of a broader overview.
Well, I think that, I feel like every layer of that we can put on in terms of creating a safe learning environment as possible. I'm just curious, would there be a possibility of a student has exhibited symptoms, they get sent to the health room, you call home, talk to the parents. If the parents can okay a COVID test, would that be available? Could we test the student at that point? Yes,
that's what we're starting to do. Or when the parent comes in to pick up, then we have the parent log in, like as an elementary student, there's a dashboard interface to it. So they log in so that they're, putting in their email and getting that result, and then doing the test there. We did not want parents like, my son woke up with some symptoms today, I'm going to keep him home, but I want to bring him in for testing. We thought, that's kind of counter, we don't want principals to manage that. So we set up a central site for that. That would be the idea, is that in the future, potentially that would be like a central site that people would come up and, like the other testing locations, drive up, kind of call this number, somebody comes out. That hasn't been a need per se right now. And it may not be a need just because we've seen the availability of COVID testing increase significantly since, the fall, when there wasn't really a lot of opportunity for that.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I would support having that option for families. I think that I would envision also, not having been responsible for contact tracing myself, that might even make contact tracing a little bit more efficient too. I think the idea of if we can get people who are sick quarantined as quickly as possible and limit their contact, I mean, doesn't just benefit our schools, that benefits our whole community. I think that would be wonderful. I think it would be wonderful if we could offer families that option too, just a more convenient way to get that testing done.
Well, and I was going to say it's helpful too, because then parents aren't having to come and take the student from the school environment where they might have been, even if they're quarantined in the health room, there might have been some exposure, and then take them to a health clinic somewhere else to get tested if there's that immediate need. I'm curious, Jeff, though, like you talked about just the staffing. The staff was going through this. Has that changed with now a lot of educators and school staff being vaccinated? Is that still something that's happening?
Yeah, we started the program about the same time as staff were getting vaccinated. So it hasn't really changed. We weren't able to offer the service prior to, I would say most everybody had their first round of vaccinations or an opportunity to at least. And we really just set it up as a volunteer just to try it out with staff first. And so, Camas has, potentially 1,000 staff members. And we were getting like 15 to 20 that wanted to come in and get their test done. And so it wasn't like these huge numbers, but it was enough for our team to figure out the process and then understand if we could scale that to the schools. To your point, Wendy, it would potentially save a layer because on our contact tracing, we're having to coordinate with all the different providers in terms of getting the documentation back, if it was a negative or positive case, or if the families do it. And so there's some layers of logistics that are taken out of that equation. But it would be something that basically I'm hearing like, I'm not opposed to it from you. So we would just look at a potential partnership and what that could mean for Vancouver and give you some options. And it's probably similar to all the districts across the state right now, is just considering it. What could that look like? What would that do? Having our contact tracing team and our health and nursing assistant staff review it and make a recommendation to you about what it could look like moving forward.
I just wanted to add on, I mean, I agree fully with what Wendy said. Is it seems like it just adds a layer of mitigation that will just help us be more informed, available to those that want it. I will say, as a parent, if I were called to the school because my student was not feeling well, I love the fact that we could potentially provide immediate resolution there, that it's kind of at the point that I'm picking my student up, I have the access to a test. And so you're not kind of jumping through the hoops, what Tracy was saying. I also I appreciate this approach to it because I think it's very comprehensive and it supports, I think, our adherence to all of the Department of Health guidance. It's just, it's from a high level communication. What are we communicating? That we're taking it seriously, that we, are following all the guidance. I like it.
Well, we'll pay attention to the opportunities as the state rolls them out. The response rate has been about 24 to 36 hours on getting the results back. So it's been very similar to if you went to a clinic. Obviously, if it didn't match that, it wouldn't be worth it, right? Like it needs to be as timely at least. And so far, so good. So that's something else that we'll continue to pursue. So just as we wrap up tonight, and obviously open up to any other comments, but the next step is to really think about that survey. And the team here has been trying to build off previous surveys and get those ready to go. So after tonight's meeting, we'll do some communication internally to staff and just let staff know that you guys were talking about this tonight, the fall, and the next step is to survey families. As I mentioned, I anticipate there'll be some frustration from families in the survey just because everybody wants to know as much as you can, right, to try to make a decision like this. And unfortunately, especially on the remote learning side, it will take our team a little bit of time to flush out exactly what this looks like. On the in-person side, I think we can tell them that, you know, we're going to really try to maximize the in-person student experience, right? And have that look to as close to what they experienced in the fall of 19 as we can. We'll continue to refine our plans and kind of give you regular updates. We would like to do an all staff survey, just kind of general about what are your hopes, what are you excited about, what are you concerned about moving forward, and allow them through the survey tool to really prioritize things, see each other's thoughts and kind of raise up some themes. So that's something I can follow up with you about, you know, what are staff thinking. The student voice is really important. And I think maybe Kathy talked about, you know, the teachers and staff that are working with students right now know that best. And our principals know that best. And so as we refine our plans, really trying to consider that and bring that in. And then you guys talked about flexibility. And so, you know, knowing that we're going to have a plan, but also that we are going to have the ability to pivot if necessary. And so that could be that we continue to have a landing page for everybody next year and see how that works in year 2. And maybe that's a practice that just was always the case moving forward. But at a minimum, it seems like we're not out of this yet. And so there are some things that we want to plan for. So that's all the slides I think that we've had this evening. So I appreciate your attention and just really thoughtful comments. It's helpful for us to just listen to you as you talk through these scenarios. Just want to open it up to any other thoughts or questions before my part's done, I guess.
Jeff, I just want to say thank you for all of this information and all of, you know, the discussion points tonight. Just that I know, you know, technically you're still, you know, you're kind of in two worlds right now, but I just appreciate all the thoughtfulness and dedication that you're putting towards these reopening plans. And I know there's a lot still to decide, but I appreciate initiating this conversation and kind of the thinking around, you know, these different considerations and, you know, wanting our input. I just thank you for all the work you're doing towards this.
Well, you're welcome, but I am only showing up one day a week and it's all the team that's doing it. So like we had 20 plus people on the call Friday, you know, we had just a lot of thought went into it. So it's definitely, I am riding the wave of the VPS staff right now. So yeah, but it's appreciated and your direction is really appreciated because we have the team that can build whatever you want us to, right? There's just costs and priorities and those kinds of things. So getting your direction is really helpful.
Yeah, so thank
Careful
you.
what you promise.
Well, I said priorities and costs, right?
Well, I just appreciate that the conversation's starting early. I just want to thank you for initiating that. I know a lot of families, it's been a hard year, so want to get a sense of what they can anticipate. Of course, we've all learned in COVID that you can't expect anything 100%, but I think it's good to just start this conversation early. So, and thank you, Dr. Snell, for joining us tonight. Thank you also to all the principals who are already working on this, those that presented tonight. It's just great. You guys have been on the front line managing at the building level. And I know it's with all the changes this year, it's been a lot. Okay. With no more input, that is our final agenda item. Our next board meeting is June 8th, I believe, and it is in person at 5:30 p.m. So we will see you then. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.